Well, I think it does both. On the one side, we are seeing an acknowledgement that governments have to play a much bigger role generally in the economy. And in that context, governments are more able to implement climate-friendly policies. At the same time, there is also a negative effect on some of the incentives to innovate. In particular, until recently, we had oil prices falling. When oil prices decline, there's less incentive to conserve. When oil prices are cheaper, there's less incentive to think about biofuels and alternative options. So from that standpoint, I think there are some negatives. Historically, we've had a world economy where governance has been heavily provided by the most developed countries, by the US and the European Union. Today, there is a need to change that and to have greater participation. Now, we've seen movement in that direction with the G20 taking a more active role in the current crisis. But the issues of who's going to decide remain a critical one and do at times inhibit a coordinated action. Well, I think if we get through this crisis, hopefully without leaving major impediments in place, I still think global trade has a bright and critically important future. Actually, if you look at this from an American standpoint, our economy currently is being boosted by government spending, and big fiscal expansions. But looking out into the future, we're going to have to tighten our belts. More demand is going to have to be generated by domestic consumption, particularly within the Asian economies. China is clearly going to be moving in that direction. For producers of minerals, though, I still think that the demand is going to recover and be present. So I'm basically fairly optimistic that over the medium term, international trade is going to continue to play a major role in the growth process. By and large, the bilateral trade flows are going to reflect the growth dynamics in both of the two economies. The U.S. economy is very slow growth, and so the United States is not buying a lot from Australia or anyone else. We've seen our imports decline. Australian growth has held up somewhat better. And so in a sense, I think our exports to Australia may well do somewhat better. But in both cases, certainly the crisis has caused slowdowns in both economies, and that in turn has reverberated very dramatically into falling trade volumes.